All right, welcome to the podcast, everybody. I want to thank you all for joining us here today. I am Adrian Lloyd, and I am joined today here with Mythical Arjuna. And we have a few different topics that we want to touch on today. Mostly it's going to be discussing international news, not so much the Canadian news. So we're going to be our first topic today we want to touch on has to do with escalating tensions that's going on between the U.S. and Russia, as well as the U.S. and Iran, since Iran is an ally of both Russia and Syria, and we have more or less a proxy war that's being fought by the U.S. inside of Syria against the Russians and the Iranians. We wanted to touch on the idea of whether there was going to be eventually descend into the idea of war. Now, I see this as if things keep going the way they go, I see it as a real possibility because right now the problem is that while Syria has a few years ago was in a real shit show, more or less they've got themselves figured out. Like President Bashar al-Assad has driven out a lot of the rebel forces inside his area. The problem is right now is that he's got Iranian and Russian forces inside of Syria that he's invited over, and then we have U.S. backed rebels that are also fighting in there. And because of these U.S. backed forces, it's making tensions. It's raising tensions against these nations, as well as the other problem is with U.S. forces being present. It's currently making it difficult for the Russians, the Syrians, and the Iranians to strike anywhere because they do so at the fear of hurting and killing any U.S. troops, which we know is not going to go over well with the Americans or President Donald Trump. So if the Americans are still going to be staying inside of Syria and putting more and more troops into areas where there's hostilities, then I think that the idea of war between these countries is inevitable, especially because we have President Trump, who's been more or less hinting towards that when it comes to Iran. He's been talking about how maybe we need to go in and take care of Iran. He pulled out of the nuclear agreement earlier this year. So, Arjun, what's your take on the whole situation going on right now?
Okay, let's start with the first thing. In this day and age, I don't think neither Iran nor Russia will risk any action or position to take an action or position that might risk war, because neither of them are in a position to go to war with the US as of now. Like least of all Iran. Iran right now is not. Iran is suffering under sanctions. The only lifeline it has currently right now is its deal with India, which is sort of keeping it afloat, because India is a huge buyer of oil from Iran. Like Donald Trump tried to put sanctions on India because of that, but somehow India convinced to, like, because of strategic interests in the Chabahar port and our requirement for independence from like any particular sources as such. We requested the US and the US agreed. We came to an agreement, and India escaped from sanctions. So, and we kept dealing with Iran. So Iran is right now badly afloat. Any more sanctions and Iran will just go under. Iran does not have the military capability to take on the US. It will just become like another Iraq if that kind of situation does occur, which I don't think it will occur. It is just right now, it is just more like grandstanding. Like I've heard news about them like holding naval exercises and the like, which is just which is like grandstanding. It's not. It's got no substance behind it. As far as buckling under pressure of world opinion, at least from the Western world side, is hello. Can you hear me? Not much. There's not much Russia can do, because Russia can't risk further removing itself from the mainstream of world politics, like geopolitics right now, because of its standoff with the US right now. it is being pushed closer and closer that closely to China, but as of now, it has no other choice. So right now, both Russia and Iran are not in comfortable positions geopolitically. So I don't think they will risk a war. But yeah, things might get worse diplomatically, but that might be the only thing. That's my reading of it.
See, for me, the one thing is that it seems that Russia especially has been escalating what's been going on. Because I know that just yesterday I saw a news article about how Russian jets were intercepted off the coast of Alaska, I think it was, and that nothing ended up coming out of it. You know, they just turn around. Seems a little bit like it might be a scouting mission for sure. But then on top of that, it seems that Russia, excuse me, it's on top of that, it seems like Russia has been warning that that they've been warning that they want to hit certain areas of Syria because they're trying to they're trying to drive out the troops, which are the U.S. backed troops. But anyway, this area is it's a U.S. military base called Atomf, and there's this whole 55-kilometer area there. And in there, the U.S. have pretty much embedded themselves with a bunch of different Syrian rebels. And this is an area that the Russians and the Syrians are wanting to hit. So I know that there was a report in the Hill the other day, and also Business Insider, where Russia was warning the U.S. throughout the week that they were preparing to launch offenses against the rebel forces in that area. Now, because the U.S. troops are embedded, this could mean that they get themselves into they could get themselves into a bad situation. They put themselves in a very dangerous situation if there is going to be launching an attack. They'll probably come in with airstrikes first, and then follow it up with ground troops. Sorry, I stumbled over that word. So it looks like they're warning that, but then when they got the warning, the U.S. Central Command ended up sending in another 100 troops into this area after they got the warning from the Russians. So it seems like even the U.S. is sort of is starting to beef up their positions as well when it comes to protecting the rebels right now. And it is the rebels, right? It is the rebels inside Syria that are currently the ones that are trying to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. And that's a dangerous precedent right there, especially when you got U.S. troops backing them up. So I think there's only a matter of time that Syria and Russia and Iran are going to wait before they make their strikes. And when they make their strikes, if U.S. troops are in the area, it's going to be disastrous for them. Well, the other thing is,
it is.
Oh, go ahead.
The key point regarding that was that Russia has been accused of backing ISIS fighters. That is the key point there, and that works against Russia as far as credibility goes. So if Russia has to pick a fight with the US, it needs credibility, which is the only currency it can use to sort of garner support, because you can't just go to fight with a big country just like that, right? You need support. You need world support to do something like that. Whether it is if it was the US would still need like, for example, George Bush had the coalition of the willing. Like, you need support to go to war. If it's a unilateral action, there can be diplomatic consequences which can affect a whole range of a whole spectrum of things like trade deals and all with other countries, because everybody has their own interests. So right now, because of the Novichok incident in London, and because of nations of supporting ISIS fighters in Syria, Russia is under a lot of scrutiny. Regardless, it means not counter US meddling in the US elections. That aside, these two are very serious allegations which sort of precludes Russia from getting any world support. So if Russia has to go to war, or for that matter, even Iran has to go to war, they need world support. And I don't think the OIC or the GCC has the gumption to take on the coalition of the Western countries, for that matter, because they don't have the support that they need or they could have right now. It's not there. So war. If anybody talking of a war, it's like that. it's like the Iraqi information minister who was proclaiming victory against the U.S. forces like 2 hours before U.S. walked into Baghdad, into the Iraqi capital, and to like 2 hours later he was in jail. 2 hours before that he was talking about we will defeat the U.S. forces. 2 hours later he was in jail. So as a prisoner of war. So it's like that. It's that kind of a situation. Minus the minus the warmongering.
Oh, sorry, I had my mic muted actually. What I was saying is, if that was to happen, if the U.S. was to, the Russians were to bomb these U.S. forces there as well as the rebels, then I think things would actually turn pretty violent pretty quickly because U.S. would want to respond. But then Russia has a bunch of allies that they could call in. Even Russia and China have been getting pretty cozy lately, which means that we would have to worry about that as well. We would have to worry about China getting pulled into the mix. China has a pretty big military, and the thing is about, at least I don't know about Iran as an offensive army, but if Iran was to get invaded, something that I know that the something that kept wanting to say George Bush. Donald Trump was saying that he's been getting pretty uppity with them, and then I know that Israel as well has been talking a lot about Iran, so they would probably want to join in. Iran is not so simple as it would be in Iraq. It's a much bigger country, as well as the terrain makes it very difficult to traverse. So I think that it wouldn't go as well as people are trying to make it seem. The thing is, too, is we're also dealing with a bunch of countries that have nuclear capabilities. We have the Americans with the largest nuclear arsenal. We would have Israel that has a large nuclear arsenal. We have Russia. We have China. These are all nuclear capable countries. And I mean, I know that we've been hearing a lot lately when it comes to Iran about their nuclear capabilities, but I've been questioning that recently, is whether they are really as advanced as people are saying they are. Because as I've looked into it, I've just realized that this has been going on for some 20 years, where I think it's actually been Benjamin Netanyahu who's been saying that Iran's getting the bomb. Iran's getting the bomb. He's been I went back to look at it, and he's been saying this since like 1992, I think, where he's saying like they're only a couple years away. In 1992, he was saying they were 3 to 5 years away. By 2009, he's saying they're only a year or so away. By 2012, he's saying it's a few months away. And then like we've still been hearing this. Even recently, he's been saying in 2018, like he's been talking about how, well, they're only months away. If they may even have the capability now. But considering how in 1992 they were supposed to be about 3 years away, this is a long time for them not to have a bomb. So I've actually been questioning whether they actually have the capability to, if they have the capability even to create nuclear weapons right now. I mean, personally, I've never been crazy about Benjamin Netanyahu. I've always seen him as a war hawk. I've always seen him as a guy who's sort of not to be trusted. But so I don't know about that, if they actually have the nuclear capabilities. Obviously, even if they did, it wouldn't be up to the standards of America. But just the idea that we would be getting ourselves, it seems like this would lead to, it really does seem like if there were hostilities that were to break out, it would lead into World War III, simply because of, it'd be similar to what happened in World War I, where a couple countries get into a conflict, and then their allies start getting pulled in, because it would be like America would jump in, Israel would jump in, probably France would jump in because they're involved there too. I'm sure the UK would probably join. Canada would probably be getting asked, and we'll send all 3 of our soldiers over there. And but then even on the other side, if it was the Russians, they could pull in Iran, they could pull in China, and I know they've got a few other allies around. I don't know how strong they are, but just it seems to me like that would be very. It seems to me like that would be very a very real possibility.
Yeah, could be. See, but there are, during the World Wars there were quite a few converging interests that led to the World War. right? Allies got pulled in because they had converging interests. But in today's world, with countries having so many diverging interests, it's not as easy as to get pulled into a sort of a world war. Like it's very difficult because there are too many diverging interests. Like France has too many interests in the Middle East to like let it become a sort of a battleground like that. And as far as like the nuclear capabilities are concerned, I see where would Iran get the technology from, right? There are only couple of three sources Iran could get nuclear capabilities from. Nobody else would give it. Even if there were no nuclear sanctions on Iran, there would be only three places where Iran could get nuclear weapons from. A, China. B, North Korea. C, Pakistan. And they won't even get nuclear weapons for nuclear weapons program or even a civil nuclear program from China directly. They would get it either through Pakistan or through North Korea, because China doesn't want to be seen as a proliferator, because China is already in trouble with the energy for very reasons, and it is already a known proliferator, right? Like it's people find like in Western terms, people would find it unconscionable that China is the proliferator it is, like at the level it is, because it is indiscriminately proliferating at the first chance it gets. It gave nuclear weapons to Pakistan, which was a known terror supporting state even 4 or 5 decades ago when they started proliferating. They gave the nuclear weapons program to North Korea that everybody is afraid of today. So and on the other hand, China being a proliferator, and the relationship between Russia and China is not that one of good friends. It is more of like we have to be friends right now because everybody else is against us. It's like the two bullies who are isolated on the other side. So Russia doesn't really want to be friends with China. Russia has too many land border disputes with China to be real good friends with China. So and Russians and the Chinese have had a very long-standing political conflict from the days of communism, because they did not agree on the styles of communism. From that time, there is a deep institutional mistrust between Russia and China, whether or not the government changes. So and Vladimir Putin is a sort of he's the product of communist Russia, so to speak. So he will have no real love lost for China. So as far as proliferation is concerned, nobody wants to be seen proliferating with Iran, and and right now there is too much scrutiny on China, on North Korea, and on Pakistan for Iran to get a nuclear program that fast. Means it will take ages and ages and ages. Like there is this story about Pakistan, and Pakistan is the not the most reliable ally, right? As far as a nuclear program is concerned, right? During the days of Osama bin Laden, there was this guy who was the chief scientist of their military nuclear program. Yeah, he was the chief scientist of the enrichment program. He went to meet Osama bin Laden nuclear bomb. He told them that we'll help you make the dirty bomb. Osama bin Laden, after talking to this guy for about 10-20 minutes, he said no. Right? Imagine a terrorist is getting a bomb free of cost, and he's saying no to the Pakistani. Why? Because he thought the guy who had come to meet them was absolutely nuts. This chief scientist, who was the head of the enrichment program in the military nuclear program, he later went on to write a book which quoted statistics like he had calculated the exact temperature of hell. He had calculated how many angels could stand on the tip of a pin. Stuff like that, like weird, crazy, like stuff like that. This guy was the head of their enrichment program, and he had gone to Osama bin Laden to offer them the bomb, and then got turned down by a terrorist because the terrorist thought that this guy was not reliable enough. So this is the condition of the proliferation business in Pakistan, right? So Pakistan cannot be a reliable proliferator. China is not a reliable proliferator because China doesn't want to be seen proliferating. So that leaves who? North Korea, and North Korea right now is out of business basically because they're under too much scrutiny. So where is Iran going to get its nuclear program from, right? Who is it going to get it from? Because the Western countries are not even going to are not even going to let them smell uranium. Forget about giving them a reactor. So who are they going to get the nuclear program from? Right? That's a quite. See, if you are considering that things are getting out of hand with Iran, you have to consider this question also, no?
Oh, that's a good point, I guess. And actually, I like what Bold said in the chat. He says, you guys are sweating this too much. I feel fine. Bono's got this. Bono's going to set everything right. That's awesome. And I did see...
And Bold, by the way...
Go ahead.
By the way, he got the name of the band wrong. It's not DNR, it's GNR.
Yeah, I think he was right.
Roses.
It's Guns N' Roses, Chinese Democracy. Oh, well. No big deal. And actually, I did notice it a little earlier, but I think now's a good time to bring it up. Little Gray Cells in the chat. He's actually been... I don't know if he's still there right now. Maybe he took off.
Uh-huh.
But I've always... One thing I liked about his channel, and as I've talked to him a little more, is he's kind of made me think more about who's playing... pretty much as he says right in the chat, he says, is it just me, or is anyone getting really tired of the theater that is presented publicly when the strings are being pulled behind the scenes by a selected group of very powerful people? This is actually something that he's kind of started to get me onto a lot more, is that there, in a lot of situations, there are a lot of people behind the scenes that are manipulating political and world events in order to for their own benefit. And I mean, it's not always the same group of people. But just I give a little tidbit of what's coming up. I'm planning to do it this weekend. I'm going to be doing episode 79 that I did that ended up getting banned was the first of my new series I was coming up with called Know Your Owners, and it's just about the people who spend a lot of money behind the scenes to manipulate things. So the next one I'm working on that he actually put me on was CD Jackson, and pretty much all I'm going to say is like for this is everyone's concerned about fake news these days. Well, all I'm going to say is it has something to do with CIA involvement. There's a lot of evidence there supported, at least in America, there's a lot of evidence to support it. And I'm going to get into that when I do my next episode this weekend. But so that's something that he's actually brought up. And when it comes to the whole conflict right now about what's going on in Syria between the Russians, Americans, and Iranians, I don't know who's manipulating that right now. I would have to look more into that to try and figure that out. But it probably has something to do with a lot of... I wouldn't be surprised if it has something to do with a lot of oil companies. Anyway, my last point I was just going to make, at least right now, is not in concerning that if there would be an actual war, but with what we were talking about just a few minutes ago about that military base that's surrounded by the rebel armies that the Russians were planning to attack. The one thing I also said is that there were more than 100 troops who were sent in by the U.S. forces into this area, and this is actually even a violation of their own rules of engagement of congressional authorization, because it was Joint House Resolution 124 of the 113th Congress that said U.S. troops were not to be when in Syria were not to be placed in any hostilities or any area where there could be hostilities. I know they're military, and that's always part of your job. But I just think that with them sending in more troops when they're being warned that an attack is going to come, it seems like that is going to be it seems like that's a little like that's a violation of their House Congress. I don't know if you have any point on that before you want to move on.
Could you repeat that part, last bit again?
Just
that violation before the violation part. How is it a violation? What?
Because the Russians were warning the U.S. troops. They were saying, we're going to attack this area, more or less because there's a lot of U.S. troops embedded with the rebel forces. So, like, if they attack, it's a possibility that U.S. forces could be killed. So what U.S. Central Command did is, after they got this warning, they sent in 100 more troops into the area. But then
Uh-huh.
the resolution states that they're not supposed to be put into any hostilities or any area where there's a possibility of hostilities. So many people are seeing this as
Knowingly,
yeah,
knowingly.
knowingly doing it. Some have
But
even used the example
yeah,
as
but
U.S. troops are being used as a human shield.
exactly what is happening with it, because see, America is trying to maneuver Russia by saying that we are sending more troops here, don't attack. That's what America is hoping for, and it might happen that Russia might even back off from those airstrikes, because but even though that's quite a gamble, but it might end up going in America's favor, because if Russia attacks, then it comes under even more global pressure, right? America doesn't have to retaliate with war or anything, but or with airstrikes of its own. Just by having those troops there, Russia has a big deterrent to overcome, right? That US troops are there, we should not attack.
Fair enough.
But that's a big gamble. That's a big gamble, especially with a character like Putin. That's a big gamble.
Alrighty, would you like to move on?
Yeah, you wanted to speak about those that Article 11 and 13.
So I don't know if anybody listening to this or even you watch Mr. Medicare. He's just one of those YouTubers that likes to laugh at everything. As he put it, Europe just cucked itself. So,
Wow.
so with Article 13, this pretty much censors the internet to it's a. I think Article 13 really is dealing more with their copyright laws, but it's pretty much censoring the internet to the point where if you post a link to an article or you try and post a meme that is already out there, then you could actually be subjected to paying taxes on it or even fines if you're using it, because it'd be falling underneath your copyright laws. So to me, it seems like a real way to censor their internet. And one thing that I've noticed, and again, Little Gray Cells was the one who started putting me onto this, is that ever since the first announcement of Article 13, because it was just passed a couple days ago, but it was brought up, a few months ago, and then it doesn't get ratified, I don't believe, until something around December. So there's still a possibility that they could fight back against it. But the one thing about it is the fact that now you are pretty much screwed in whatever you do. But you have ever since they announced the Article 13, I've been noticing that a lot of news articles and websites that are from Europe, they're now starting to say that you have to agree to their cookies before you can get access to the site. So you go onto a site for the first time, it says, click accept because we want to use cookies. And it seems to me like it's just cookies are a way of monitoring also your internet access. Like usually it has to do with sign-ins and everything like that. But just the fact that all these European websites were starting to bring it in right as Article 13 was coming in, it seems to me like it was more to the story. And I'm sure there's more to cookies than just simply, signing in without having to put your password and username every time.
No. Cookies is also the sort of like it's like the autofill option in the browser, right? Cookies are like that. They store your preferences. This information gets sold to, say, ad trackers and all, like those who come up with algorithms to sort of push certain kinds of ads depending on your online consumption. But also the fact is, Article 13 was charitably called the war on memes by some politician in Europe, and 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 in conjunction with Article 11, which was supposed to be that all these big news aggregators, Google and Facebook and these guys, they giving links which promote smaller publications, right? So smaller news publications, if Google used their link, then these smaller publications have the right to charge Google for publishing those links. Now, the funny thing that they said was that this can also be used to outcompete even smaller publications which cannot afford to say lower their prices, right? So there are lots of problems with. See, this is just the first steps of maybe censoring the internet, but I don't know if it is that difficult. Memes and links are maybe a small aspect of internet culture, right? If internet is a very dynamic platform, and like if memes are gone, then they'll come up with something else, right? Because because there was a time in the internet when memes didn't exist, like the early 2000s, the late 90s. Memes didn't exist then. Internet culture flourished then also. Then memes came, internet culture flourished. The memes, if they go today, then also internet culture will flourish. It's too dynamic. You can't control it. How many laws are you going to come up with, right? Like unless you become the thought police and you start controlling people's thoughts and creativity, I don't think you can stop the internet. That's just a foolish notion. So it's an exercise. If you watch Star Trek, they used to have the Borg, which they had that line. No, they used to say resistance is futile. So it's like that. Resistance is absolutely futile if you're trying to fight the internet.
Oh,
That's one Goliath you
absolutely.
will never win against.
The internet is just a force in and of itself, and it can't. Yeah, there's always going to. You can't stop it. And I mean, even so, like a lot of people, what I think is going to end up happening is a lot of Europeans are going to get more involved with the dark web, where just your activities aren't monitored nearly as much. I know that I have a Tor browser. I've used it a few times, not too much, but I think it's going to become much more popular over in Europe right now. But one thing I thought about
Yeah.
was because even things like YouTubers that want to use articles, they can now can be under this scrutiny. So like I think of somebody like Sargon of Akkad, who does his This Week in Stupid series. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of him, and he's
Yeah,
constantly
it's really fun.
using. He's constantly using news articles in order to show what's going on. But I feel like somebody like him is
Yeah.
now going to be much more limited because he can't show those articles without risking having to pay a tax, or even if he doesn't pay it, pay a fine. But I've even heard it to the point where if somebody puts an image out, if you want to not necessarily even claim it as your own, but you want to use that image, you want to take it, you have to first take it, you have to change it around in order to make it original in your own work, and then you've got to post it. If anything, like it seems so innocent when we're talking about things like memes, and it seems like people are just getting too butthurt about like Pepe the Frog and things like that. I know Pepe's been dead for about a year
Yeah.
now, but uh,
Yeah.
but it just seems to me that it has a much more sinister aspect to it, that it's also going to limit people's ability to communicate, in that they can't really be letting people know about these sort of things. They can't really post these information, these links, these articles, and I think it's going to do more harm than good because of that. I mean, I wouldn't want anything remotely of the source to happen over here. Actually, so considering how I brought up Mr. Medicare at the beginning, one thing that he did a live stream about that like 2 days ago or something, and one thing that he brought up was, which is funny, is that a bunch of the Europeans that were watching his stream were getting really butthurt about the whole thing. And then he says, you're bad when Canada can come out and start shitting on you now. Canada, who's been living under a rock for 2 years under Justin Trudeau, can come out and spit on you guys now.
Oh, that's terrible. But the fact is, like, see, considering this war on memes now, considering this aspect, one of another friend of our podcast, Mr. Bored Like a Leopard, he might otherwise known as Idgaf Leopard, is the most affected by this, right? In our own lives, because his content will be severely limited if he can't use memes. No, I'm kidding. Because he links a lot of news articles and he uses a lot of memes, so he won't survive in Europe. So, bold, you better stick to the US, huh? So anyway,
Oh,
so yeah, but the fact is, I would be more concerned if they came out with a law saying that you can't say certain words, because that seems to be the logical next step, right? Like they might come up with a law saying you can't use certain pronouns, you can't use certain words, you can't use these words. These are illegal and offensive. They come under a hate speech, right? If they start expanding their hate speech sort of definition by law in legal legislation and all that, that is more concerning, right? That is more concerning than say a war on memes, because war, and you're right, war on memes may sound innocent, but it may just be a stepping stone for the for legislation that may say don't say certain things, which is abjectly terrifying, at least to me.
Yo, absolutely, it is to me too. I mean, it seems to me that Europe is really going down the road of George Orwell's 1984. I've been rereading the
Mhm,
book over the last few weeks because I'd read it a while ago, and I decided
mhm,
to pick it up again just because it's been so long. And as I've been reading through it, it just seems a lot of what takes place there is in that book is starting to come true for Europe. You know, I mean, I think about certain things such as it was called like doublespeak, I think is one of the terms that was used by George Orwell, which is the idea
yeah,
that you can
yeah,
say one thing and then say something else that's completely contradictory, but it's not a problem.
uh-huh.
And this seems to be what's sort of coming is coming out of this sort of thing. And I wouldn't be surprised if they start expanding on their hate speech laws soon. I mean, I know over here it's pretty concerning, and even some platforms such as Twitter has been getting pretty crazy when it comes to that sort of thing. One thing that I saw the last couple
See,
days is that Twitter is
uh,
apparently is banning the use of the term illegal aliens. I don't know if this is completely true yet, but one thing that many people have tried so far, and Twitter will not allow it, is if you try and use the link US White Clock. And what that is, the US White Clock, is that it's actually it's supposed to be like somebody started a clock which is supposed to be the countdown until white people are the minority in America. But many people have been showing how if you try and tweet out that link, you can't. It will completely ban you from doing it. Plenty of people shown screen caps of that. And you know what? When I saw that going down, I just gave it a shot. I was like, what the hell? I'll try it. And it didn't allow me either. It said my tweet failed to load. And I tried it again and I got the exact same message. So this is coming from a company, and also things like Google. These are all coming from a country where they have freedom of speech. Yet, like America is really one of the only countries that has true freedom of speech. I know Canada doesn't. We have freedom of expression, but even in that, they call it within reasonable limits. So there's certain things you can't talk
mhm.
about, certain things you get in trouble for. And I think it's actually worse in Europe right now. So when you already take that into consideration, and then you also apply this Article 11 or Article 13 in Europe, it seems like they're really having every aspect of their ability to speak out just being suppressed.
Mhm.
And the EU too. The thing about it is like a much more globalist style of governance. You know, it's like it's taken away a lot of the autonomy and sovereignty of countries. I mean, fuck. Hungary and Poland have been getting the shit end of the stick from the EU because they're not going to take on any migrants, but that's their prerogative. They are an independent country, but because of this, people are even like the EU was even thinking about sanctions against these countries, and I think it was Hungary. I think it was Hungary that ended up putting out a Stop Soros bill, which had to do with the idea of anybody who housed illegal immigrants. And that was not perceived well by the EU, and they slammed Hungary for it. So it just seems to like the idea of the EU. I'm not in support of the EU because it really is just a globalist government that takes away any sort of individual rights from the people there.
I've been like watching videos regarding this, and there have been many podcasters and like live streamers who have now like given Hungary the title of being the most red-pilled like country on earth. So, and they seem to be loving that the way Viktor Orban and Hungary are standing up to the EU. So, but the fact of the matter is, if you look more closely, all these governments which form the EU, they are also slowly and slowly changing their stance, because their populations are slowly and slowly turning against globalism. Right? In Sweden, the socialist coalition survived by the skin of their teeth, and even now there are calls for the resignation of Stephen Lofven, and they have just got one more seat than the center right alliance. So, and that government may not last, right? Just like Angela Merkel's government. Merkel couldn't make the government for months and months, and it is still not certain that she will survive with this government, right? So all these globalist governments, like, might not survive. The Austria booted out their leftist government. France, Macron is doing even more damage than Francois Hollande did. So the next time, it very well may be that Marine Le Pen might come in, and and France is one of the most leftist countries. Italy booted out the leftist government. So, and the funny thing was, the Italian Prime Minister, what's his name, Matteo Salvini.
I think so, yeah.
That guy, he says, he says, refugee. He made an extreme statement. He said refugees will only see Italian dogs via a postcard. They can only see Italy through a postcard. That's how they will experience Italy, and no other way. He meant that nobody is going to come into Italy from all these refugee crisis places. So the fact is, Europe is changing its stance. If Sweden can change its stance on immigration and give an election result like the one which came out the other day, then the EU is in trouble, right? And all these things about sanctions and all, this is because the EU is rattled, because their own countries are turning around and telling them that no, we don't want this immigration bullshit, right? Denmark was the one of the first countries to change its policies on immigration, saying that we don't want this nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Denmark, which Bernie Sanders quotes to be the model of all socialist countries, Denmark turned around and said, no, we are not that socialist. So
they said, they come out and say, we're capitalists with some socialist programs. We're not a socialist country. Yeah.
So basically, it's things are changing. Like, it's like a glacier. When a glacier moves, it moves a little bit, but it moves. Definitely it moves, right? Inexorably it moves. So there is nothing much the globalist governments can do right now, because people don't want refugees from the worst parts of the earth who are coming in and messing up their country and their culture. Who are attacking their values, who are attacking their women. They don't want that nonsense. Who wants that nonsense? Nobody wants that nonsense.
No, right? Absolutely.
And that's very clear. They're trying to keep a lid on it as much as they can, but more and more these elections that you see, and the results that they give, they can't keep a lid on it for too long. And the next referendum might be France. If France goes, that's the end of the EU, right? Well, what's Germany? Germany wants to be the sole member of the club.
Hey, that's gonna bite them in the ass in the end, because in all these countries, like many of these countries, we are seeing a revolution. I mean, hell, it almost in France with Marine Le Pen, like you mentioned, but even they are really rolling, because I remember that about maybe 6 months ago, there was a report that Sweden was handing out pamphlets that they hadn't handed out since World War II, and it was what was to do if war broke out, what happens to do if there's a disaster, where to go, how to take care of yourselves. And everyone was saying, well, this is because, the news was saying that this is because Russia is making moves close to Sweden. You know, they're very worried that Russia is going to invade them. That wasn't the case if you went to the Swedish sources themselves. They were literally talking about the threat from within, because there were a number of Islamic communities that were being they took over areas. And then even as someone like Tim Pool showed out, you go into these areas, the cops aren't going to stop you, aren't going to save you if you go in. They full out tell you, you go in there, we're not coming in after you. And it was because a number of violence had been breaking out. So like we're seeing that they're seeing what's end up happening with this, what they're seeing with this mass migration. It's not going over well. I mean, one thing that I saw recently, and I made the mistake, I kind of reported briefly in one of my podcast episodes, and I made the mistake, I thought it was in Scotland. It was actually in Greece, where a number of migrants were given luxurious homes, like really fucking nice homes, for the people, and then they were complaining that it wasn't enough, And it might have not just been Muslims; it might have been like North African migrants, and things like that. But yeah, that's the problem: is the fact that
who are also Muslims, who are also Muslims.
yeah, I think it just depends where you are in Africa, because I know it's like a mixture of Muslims and Christians over there. Some
Yeah,
areas, maybe it's
yeah.
West
Yeah, see,
Africa that's more Christian.
most of that's a semantics, but most of North Africa is Muslim. Like Libya is Muslim, Morocco is like stuck between like a half Muslim, half communist kind of thing. Like all these countries, like Egypt is definitely a Muslim. It's in fact a Salafi Muslim country. So yeah, so most of North Africa, especially Libya and all, from where all these North African immigrants are actually like trying to get into Europe from. It's a difficult. It's one of the, especially Libya after Gaddafi is one of the worst places on earth. Right, oil or no oil.
Mm.
So yeah.
Yeah, so like this is the problem that a lot of people are having, and it's the problem because when you're bringing in so many people, you're having the clash of cultures. A lot of people come in and they get involved with. Actually, this is something that Maxime Bernier here in Canada was talking about before he left the Conservative Party of Canada, and he's officially started up his own party, the People's Party of Canada. I'm super excited about that. I'm looking forward to a change.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that he was talking about is with the idea of mass immigration and the cult of diversity is that the fact that all you care about is diversity and how many people you can bring in, a lot of people are just going in with their own groups. They're just staying. So if you're Muslim, you're staying with the Muslims. If you happen to be Chinese, you're staying with the Chinese. And you're not integrating into the society. So you have all these little pockets of groups of people in one country, which inevitably is going to lead to people getting into fights with each other, not necessarily physical fights just now, but there's a lot of tension between these groups, and then because of it we're having because of it, eventually it's going to lead to something bigger. You're going to have people that are going to break out and have full out riots against each other. In some ways, you see that with the gang activity that goes on in the States, because apparently the black gangs and the Latino gangs hate each other, absolutely hate each other, and are constantly fighting with each other. Now, this is gang warfare we're talking about right now, but I think at least in a minor example, we could take this and apply it to when we're just talking about groups of people. And you're also when you have such large groups of people in there, they bring all aspects of their culture with them, and they stay with those aspects of their culture rather than integrating and bringing what is supposed to be the good parts of their culture and leaving out the bad. So, for instance, I love the Chinese food, that is absolutely delicious. So that's a good part of their culture. But then at the same time, if we look at, say, the Islamic culture right now, things like female genital mutilation are going up in Canada. There's a lot more women that are having this committed against them. And even just the certain things like women who wear the burqa or the hijab, they're much more present now in Canada than they were 10, 20 years ago. I mean, even as a kid, I remember it was much rarer to see a woman wearing a hijab. Now it's not so rare anymore. And when you have so many groups of people, it's probably going to continue, which means eventually there are going to be little pockets of Middle East, little pockets of China in there, and then you're just going to have the Canadian people somewhere in the middle of everything.
Yeah, see, why doesn't anybody have a problem with the Indian community when they move to the country, to name a Western country, right? The Indian community, I'm not talking about the Sikh community per se, I'm talking about the Hindu community or the rest of the Indian community who are non-Sikh. Nobody ever has a problem with them because they don't stand out, right? Neither do they try to stand out. They have their own traditions, they have their own culture, they make temples, they go to their temples, they have their festivals, they celebrate it grandly also, but somehow you never hear about Indians being in your face, or Indians committing crime, or Indians robbing banks. Yeah, Indians having an MS-13 like gang, right? Right. And even if you hear about illegal immigration coming from India, you will only see those guys taking up low-end jobs and not causing crime. You will never hear about crime coming from the Indian community, however small or large it may be. Right. India and Canada and the UK have the three largest Indian communities in the world. and the crime coming from from the Indian communities in these three countries is almost negligible.
Hell, it's so small
Very
you don't
rarely
even hear it in the crime statistics.
you don't hear about it. So obviously there is culturally a thing, right? We may be coming to those countries from India, but we are not out there to conquer that country. We are not out there to subjugate that country and bend the values of that country to our will. No, we are there to flourish. We are there to do well. We are there to live our lives. It's as simple as that, right? The hadith says that a Muslim may only live in a country which is majority non-Muslim or is being ruled by non-Muslims if he can if that Muslim is doing jihad against that country. That is what the hadith says. The whole thing says that a Muslim may not live in a country which is ruled by non-Muslims, or if it is majority non-Muslim. The only way it can live in a majority non-Muslim country or a country which is ruled by non-Muslims is if he's doing jihad against that country or if he's ruling that country. And it is his sworn duty, God-given duty to convert that whole population. So in that case, how well do you think is that kind of a person going to adjust to, say, Canadian values, the Canadian way of life, or for that matter, US values and US way of life, or any name a Western country, right? How well do you think he's going to adjust? He's not going to adjust very well. He's going to he's going to, one way or the other, depending on how moderate or extremist he is, one way or the other, he's going to go out and try and subvert what's going on. Yeah, it'll start off with something innocuous as, say, pork ban, or we should be allowed to wear hijabs and burqas to school, and stuff like that, right? So like that day you were mentioning, we were having that like video chat that the other day, and you mentioned that in the previous locality where you recently moved your house, and the previous locality you used to live in, lot many more burqas are now visible, lot many more hijabs are now visible, right? You have the feeling of that creeping sort of uh, multiculturalism happening. Let's just say that, right?
Well, let me put it this way. When we
So
would go out to the corner store, me and my wife, there was some
uh-huh,
times where we'd walk out and she'd be the only
yeah,
woman without a covering on her head. Just as an example
yeah,
of how it
exactly.
was
And
happening.
yeah,
Go ahead.
by the way, Bolt says the Sikhs seem to be doing okay here in Ohio. What's the big problem with them? Well, not with majority of the Sikhs, but with some of them who are involved with Khalistani terror. They have their own issues. So and those Khalistani guys are involved with the Pak ISI and all the Haqqani network and all these guys. They are being funded by those guys. That's the problem.
Yeah,
Not
actually,
with all Sikhs.
Arjun.
Majority Sikhs are peaceful.
Actually, yeah, that Arjun's was the one who sent me that article that was from the newspaper down there, where it was showing that Pakistan, the ISI, was involved in a lot of the Khalistani movement, including the Khalistani movement here in Canada. Yeah, I remember that. I'm pretty sure I ended up reporting on it in one of the podcasts, actually, one of the podcast episodes.
Yeah. They say the Sikhs in majority, they themselves don't like the Khalistani movement at all, right? They feel that it's against their faith, it's against their their nationalist pride and nationalist feelings towards India. It is just a small bunch of them who are sold out to vested interests, right? Because they have received so much foreign money. By foreign, I mean, say, ISI money. They've received so much of that money, they are unable to break out of that mold, right? And they are too filled with that poison to sort of let go of such things. And they've been reduced to some placards here and there. They're not even a major or even a relevant movement. So, and majority of Sikhs are very nice, hardworking people, and they are very industrious and very capable as a community. So, if a small but definitely dangerous portion of that community tries to hold on to a venomous ideology, then it should be dealt with by the government of any country therein. And right now, the maximum Khalistani problem that is coming in is through Canada, it is coming in through US, and it is coming in through the UK. These are the three leading countries where the Khalistani movement is flourishing, and and so to speak that. And they are using a lot of these NGOs and some gurdwaras affiliated to these NGOs. They're using them as fronts. And gurdwaras are supposed to be holy, sacred places, which these guys are sort of subverting and perverting their faith, and it's a big mess that they are creating in these countries. So if the Canadians, the Americans, and the British should really look into this problem, and yeah, that answers, I think, Bolt's question.
Now, you were saying that there was a couple things going on in India right now that you wanted to touch on as well. I believe it had something to do with Maoists getting arrested or something along those lines.
Yeah, so Maoism is the extremist form of the left, right? It's like the left wing extremism. Like they're the terrorists who came out of the communist movement, right? They are interested in sort of destroying the landscape, political landscape, infrastructure landscape. They want to destroy the nation, whichever nation they're in, right? They destroyed Nepal, and right now they organized themselves into a political party, and now they are ruling Nepal, and they are heavily pro-China. In India, they used to there was a problem with what was called the Naxal movement. There was a problem with the Maoist movement, and slowly, India has gotten rid of them. Then they politicized it, and then they sent out agents into the cities who we call urban Naxals. And these guys used to sit in the cities, be part of college faculties, be part of university education and academia, and all these the intelligentsia, and they used to disseminate Maoist propaganda. These guys were recently caught. Like 7-8 of them were recently raided and caught with plans to buy weapons from foreign, like from China, from Russia, from all these other countries. They were caught with a plan where they were formulating a plan to assassinate the current prime minister. These guys have been now raided, they have been caught, and they have been jailed. And these guys were doing it for donkey's years. They've been doing it for decades, right? They've been finally caught, and they've caught all the ringleaders who were getting all this done. And these guys had the gumption of saying, "We are innocent. The government is harassing us. Government is doing this. Government is doing that. This is an undeclared emergency. They are infringing on our rights." So much so that there were so many foolish movie stars, right? Like brainless movie stars who started this hashtag called "I'm a Naxal," right? We are with the Naxals, who have no clue about how many hundreds of thousands of people they have slaughtered, how many thousands of Indian army and central police forces they have killed, how many village after village they have burnt and slaughtered these people. Having no idea about that, these movie stars, they came out and said, "We are with the Naxals." And immediately they were burnt in public. Means they couldn't show their faces after this, because there was so much backlash. There was so much backlash from the public, and there was talk of like there was talk of like boycotting their movies and stuff like that. So immediately some people backtracked and said sorry and all that, and that was the end of it. Right now, that thing is still going on, because now they're finding links with the opposition parties. That how many opposition parties were funding these revolutionaries, how many and basically left-wing extremist terrorists. So that is the big hoo-ha that is going on right now. And this crackdown on Maoists was basically possible because the right-wing party in power, the BJP, is almost like it's become very dominant, right? It's dominating the discourse, it's dominating the landscape. There is sort of it controls the polity right now. So in a way of speaking. that has its upsides and downsides. So yeah, but if you want to deal with left-wing extremism, if you want to deal with Bold will understand this really well. Like the liberal media and all these kind of fake news guys, then you need a dominant political party with not much opposition to speak of. But for example, there's a huge fuel crisis going on in India, not in the terms of shortage, but in terms of pricing, right? The fuel prices in India, right now, are at 400% of what they should be, right? The price of 1 liter of petrol in Kolkata right now is 80 rupees, right? That is $1.60 Canadian. It is 1 liter of petrol is $1.60 Canadian, right? It was found out that 80% of that cost of 80 rupees was basically taxes, where the price of petrol should be 16 rupees, 1/6, right? Where it should be 16 rupees, it is costing 80 rupees. That is 5 times the cost. That 80% bracket is just taxes, right? Now this is hampering the middle class. It is hampering the middle class. It is putting a burden on the middle class. But there is no effective opposition to bring this issue to the forefront, and the government is not talking about it. Now this is a small thing. This is a like not a small thing, I would say. It is not like it's not in the league of, say, left-wing extremism. But if you have a thoroughly discredited opposition and you have an unchallenged government, then small things like these, they tend to slip through. Like, because during the initial days of this government had released a program saying the provident fund of all employees, whether government or private sector employees, the provident fund will be taxed. Before that, the employee provident fund scheme used to be untaxed. They announced a tax on the employee provident fund. There was a huge backlash, and at that time, the Modi government was not so strong, or they did not have enough confidence in their in their position at that time, so they withdrew that tax at that moment. But now they're supremely confident that they will get they will get a super, almost, they might even get a super majority, a 2/3 majority this time. So so considering all those things, they are in such a they are so supremely confident right now, and with a scattered, chaotic opposition, they are right now not caring for this fuel thing, the fuel price issue, which is actually putting a burden on the middle class. Because their rationalization is that, oh, the poor people need help. Yes, but you can't sort of empty the coffers of the middle class to sort of help the poor. That's an issue which is going on right now. This is the problem with having an unchallenged government, no matter how many good intentions they may have. Yeah.
And actually, just when you were saying that there, it reminds me of a George Carlin line, who I've said before that George Carlin is my favorite comedian of all time. And he had one thing when he was talking about the taxes. He says the rich have all the money, pay none of the taxes. The middle class have some of the money, pay all the taxes. The poor are there just to scare the shit out of the middle class. and it seems to work that way a lot too, because every time I always get suspicious the more and more that a government talks about the middle class, because more often than not, it's a way to appeal to a certain demographic of voters, but you're not actually doing much for the middle class. I mean, perfect example of this is Trudeau, who's constantly talked about the middle class. We need to do something for the middle class. Well, the middle class has been disappearing in Canada for some time now, and one of the reasons has to do with taxes. And he even just the other day, I don't know if it was him. Yes, I think it was him personally. He put out a tweet on Twitter where he said, like, the first thing we did when we came into government was cut the taxes on the middle class. Yeah, he actually put that out. And but the thing is this guy ran on a campaign of raising people's taxes. He talked about how the rich need to pay their fair share. They need to pay a little more. We need a progressive tax in there. That was what he ran on. And so he didn't do anything of the sort for that. And in fact, there was even something, a report that came out not too long ago, talking about how in fact the rich have been paying the least amount of taxes since the Trudeau government. Doesn't really surprise me. Most of them have been hiding their money over it. Plenty of them were caught in the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers of hiding their money offshore, including members of the government. But yeah, I've been noticing this a lot too when they talk about these situations, and yeah, I'm with you on that when you talk about the problems of having an unchallenged government. I mean, even if it's a government you agree with, if they go on for too long, it does pose problems. I mean, not that it's like a dictatorship or something like that, but it does allow them to go unchecked and unchallenged. And I find that after a certain amount of time, it's easy for a politician to just do what they want rather than what's best for the people. They sort of get a little bit disconnected with the people that's out there. It seems like that might be what's going on right now.
No, right. See, I'll tell you. There was this tweet I had once read that said, I will wait till they're talking about these fuel prices, right? The guy writing the tweet said, I will wait till the price of petrol is 500 rupees a liter, right? Which is about 10 Canadian dollars. I will wait till the price of petrol is 500 rupees a liter, and then I will ride a horse and go and give my vote for BJP.
Okay.
Right. I'm translating roughly. Basically, he's saying that I will, no matter if these fuel prices increase, I will go and give my vote for BJP. Right. I will ride a horse and go and give my vote for BJP. I don't need to use my scooter or car. So basically, that is the sentiment, and that is what the BJP is sort of counting on, or I would say, this is the sentiment that which the BJP is feeling. So which is the very reason they are not really bothering about doing anything about the fuel prices. So if people are going to say that I will suffer any amount of fuel prices, but I will still go and vote for the BJP, then BJP will say, why should we change the fuel prices? Why should we reduce the taxes? Right? It is filling our coffers. It is one of the main sources of our revenue. So why should we? So that's it. That's it. See, and as far as taxation is concerned, right. Like let's talk about China, right? At least our country is not selling us down the river. Like in India, my government is actually doing something to help the people. It's not selling the country down the river to other or to foreign powers. Like what China is doing in Africa, right? It is buying up like state companies, state broadcasters, state electricity distributors, and because why? Because those countries are in a debt trap with China. So many of these African countries, many of these Polynesian and Pacific countries are selling their countries to China. Basically, the biggest examples are Zambia. You can have a bunch of. There is another small country called Tonga. They're just absolutely selling out to China. Right. And in China itself, China taxes its citizens heavily. China just cares whether there is a bunch of rich people at the top. Right. I'm talking about, forget the party. In the party, everybody is rich in the party. In the Chinese Communist Party. They've looted the country. These guys, I'm talking about taxation on the middle class, so-called middle class in China. Right. It's tremendous taxation. And as far as corruption was concerned, there was this one mind-boggling story about China where in some corner province of the country, a deputy executive of the energy ministry, right? A deputy executive of the energy ministry, when the central police raided his house, they found 33 billion US dollars worth of cash in his house. Billion, not million. Billion with a B.
Holy shit.
Right. $33 billion in cash they found inside his house. That's a mind-boggling amount of cash to be having in your house. Right. To be having, period.
Like,
Right, we talk about all these super billionaires like this guy, what do you call, for the owner of Facebook, Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and all these guys. These guys, a deputy minister of energy in some corner province of China had $33 billion in cash inside his house. So these guys are taking from the Chinese people and just emptying the coffers. Basically, they're just looting the country, right? I'm proud to say at least my government is not like that. Right? Fuel prices is a very tiny thing compared to that. So I would say that, but still, it is not good for a government to go unchallenged. Yeah.
holy shit, $33 billion. Does he have like just like I'm trying to think of the name, but I'm forgetting it right now. It's not Donald Duck, but like one of the Disney cartoon, the really rich duck. Like Scrooge McDuck. Is he have just like a pool like him? He just jumps and dives into it, sort of thing. Like 33 billion in cash. I can't even fathom what that would look like. That would just be like an entire room filled up with cash. That's a ridiculous amount. So yeah, he had to be lifting it from somewhere. He had to be screwing it, siphoning it off from the government or something in order to get that amount of money. Holy shit, dude!
Yeah.
I don't even know what to
He
say.
only got caught because he's on the no. He only got caught because he was on the lower end of the food chain. You think the top guys, the army generals and the Politburo and standing committee, these guys get caught? You think those guys don't have like these kinds of vast sums of money, maybe even bigger sums of money? And I said equivalent of $33 billion. He had that in Chinese currency, right? Chinese currency is about 10, I think 10 yuan per dollar. So 10 times that in cash.
40 ounce in the chat. He ended up asking. He said, "Do you think flooding the Indian market with cheap oil would lower the taxes, or is it strictly a matter of corruption?"
See, we are getting cheap oil. We are getting cheap because we are the second largest. By the way, thank you for the question, 40 ounce. We are the second largest consumer of oil in the world after China. So we have access to plenty of cheap oil, and it is handled by the government-owned oil and natural gas corporation subsidiary, Indian Oil. Now the thing is, uh, we have plenty of cheap oil. We are getting plenty of cheap oil from Russia, from the US, from the Middle East. We are getting oil from everywhere. We are even getting oil from all these Libya and all these places. We have diversified our oil portfolio. The oil that we are getting is cheap. The government has put nearly 5 times, or is sort of making the value of the oil by putting taxes on it 5 times more than what it should be. Now, if the government has such a diverse portfolio of oil, and on top of that, we have our own oil wells, which are, some of them are privately owned. Now, whether or not we get cheap oil, if the tax on that is so high, who's going to flood our market with cheap oil? Where is it going to come from? If we are buying from everybody, who's going to flood? Who's the new player who's going to come and flood the market with oil, right? That's why, see, we have this central taxation system for GST, which the government is not putting the oil under. They are not putting petroleum under the GST tax, which will drastically bring down the cost of oil because it's a single tax, right? The government continues to keep it outside the ambit of the GST. But my question to you, 40 ounce, is who's the player who's going to provide the amount of oil that we need in the amount and at the cost we need it at? How are you going to flood it? It's not like Chinese steel. You can't just flood the market, right? If we are buying from everybody, who's the player who's going to flood our market?
Saudi Arabia.
So yeah, so in the meanwhile, we'll wait for 40 ounces. We'll just have some dead air and we'll wait for 40 ounces answer.
He may know, he may not. I'm not sure. I think he was just sort of making a general inquiry into the situation. Although, for me, we need to, when it comes here, we need to do something about our oil because we have here in Canada, we have a huge amount of oil that we can actually make use of, but we're not doing it right now. And actually, there is a plan in place for this exact thing. There's an article by a company called Core Ethics. It's a coreethics.org. And pretty much their whole plan is to landlock Canadian oil and to prevent it to be shared on the world market. Hold on. Why are you not switching? Interesting. I'm trying to switch my screen to actually share the article, but I don't know. It seems to be giving me some problems right now. Oh, shit. All right. Sorry, everyone. I think I'm switching there and back, and some people are probably confused because it's probably like, yeah, on this live stream. What's that?
I lost your video too. Yeah, your voice was cutting out.
Oh, sorry. Is it good now?
And I
Can you hear me now?
lost your video. Now it's back.
All right. Well, you know what? I think it's just my computer. I got a really bad computer, so I think it's being too overloaded. But pretty much from this article from a company called coreethics.org, they have what they call the tar sand campaign. And in the second paragraph of it, it says, from the very beginning, the campaign strategy was to landlock the tar sands so their crude could not reach the international market where it could fetch a higher price per barrel. This means national and grassroots organization to block all proposed pipelines. And at least to me, this seems to be the case because we've been having just about every single one of our pipelines, more or less, has either been scrapped or even when they are coming into place, it's a complete shit show. And right now, we have the Kinder Morgan pipeline, which is supposed to carry the oil from Alberta over to BC in the west. And that has been a shit show since the beginning. It got to the point where they were getting protested so much that they couldn't even work on it anymore. And the Canadian government bought it to the tune of $4.6 billion, I think. And then now the construction still hasn't continued on it. Kinder Morgan actually made a profit on it for the price that was sold. And this is an old pipeline that we're talking about. Like, this is not like a newer one. This is like one that I think the pipeline has been getting built for some time. But they've canceled every other form of pipeline that we could do. And a lot of times it comes from organizations in left-wing provinces. For instance, there was one which was the Energy East pipeline. That one was supposed to supposed to be a pipeline that carried the crude from Alberta over to the east. It would be over in the Maritimes, and then they could refine the oil there. That ended up getting scrapped, and that was all due to the Quebec government, because the Quebec government started talking about how they didn't want to. That's going on because, environmental reasons, things like that. But at the same time, actually, what I thought was kind of a bitch move by Quebec in order to do this was the fact that they were doing this. But the Maritimes are some of our poorest provinces in Canada. So this would have created jobs. In fact, jobs are very hard to find out there. And because of it, it would have created plenty of jobs for the people out there. It would have created revenue for them, but it was completely blocked by the Quebec government. And I have no doubt that this Core Ethics had something to do with that. So we need to do something about our oil over here as well, because we're currently going through a problem with that. And the thing is, too, is we're not making pipelines, but we still got to transport the oil. How are they transporting it? Either through trucks or what's happening a lot more is through trains. These are much more dangerous ways to transport oil than a pipeline. Thing about a pipeline is it all travels through the pipe, but you can shut off the pipe if there's a spill. You can shut it off at different locations. And that would help prevent any more oil spill. But then we've had plenty of trains that derail and crash and just spill the oil everywhere. And we need to do something over here about that as well, because we're having our own. We're pretty much having these progressive activists that are preventing anything of the sort from happening.
See. Speaking of oil in Canada, by the way, India was interested in buying. Talk about a diverse portfolio. India was interested in buying oil from Canada too, right? So yeah. So I'm going back to my question to 40 ounce. If you heard that question, dude, answer. Where are we going to flood India with cheap oil? Anyway, so one more question regarding like I heard it heard somewhere that the problem with the pipeline is less political, is less economic than it is political in the terms of like it's more of a French versus it's like a Quebec versus Alberta kind of rivalry because of which they're not allowing the oil pipeline to move forward. They don't want more money flowing into provinces like Alberta and all where the oil is. Am I correct about that?
What's that?
I asked that it's a political problem regarding the oil in the sense that it's more of a rivalry between Quebec and Alberta, right? Because Alberta is where the oil is, right? Alberta and all these places.
Mostly in
So
Alberta.
it's yeah. So Trudeau doesn't like Alberta. So because that's the prevailing sort of feeling at least. And and I heard somewhere that like the problem is a political one where it's because of the rivalry between the Quebecois and the Albertans. The oil thing is not moving forward because they don't want for whatever reason the Albertans to get more money via the oil. So or more jobs in Alberta, so something like that. It was a very weird conspiracy theory type like principle that come up with, but I don't know. I don't know how much truth there is to it.
Well, the funny thing about
That's
that.
what I wanted to ask.
Well, I think there's always been a bit of a rivalry between Alberta and Quebec because we got it's sort of the East versus West rivalry that goes on. But the thing is that I find interesting about that is the fact that Quebec, when they do that, they bite the hand that feeds them. Because in Canada, we got something called equalization payments. And the equalization payments is where it's a very socialist thing to do. I'm really not in favor for it. But anyway, so what it does is the equalization payments is the provinces that make the money. They end up having to give a certain amount of money to the provinces that don't make so much, that are actually in debt. And the idea of this is to give the other provinces a better standard of living. Now, the equalization payments are also based on certain things, such as population is one of the big ones, as well as GDP. But Quebec, because they have I think, the second largest population in Canada, next to Ontario. And Ontario does take a little bit of equalization payments. I think it kind of depends, year to year on how the economy is doing. Sometimes we've been in the positives, sometimes we're in the negatives. Anyway, so Quebec constantly has been in debt. They take the largest share of the equalization payments, and Alberta pays the most when it comes to the equalization payments. So Quebec so far has taken about since I think the 50s or so, $200 billion in equalization payment, which is now, I think, as of today, more than 50% of the total amount of equalization payments that have been passed around. But then they turn around and they like to thumb their nose at Alberta and prevent them from working on their pipelines and things like that. So it's actually, Alberta is really getting fed up with Quebec because of it. And it's actually, there's been some sentiment in the past of a Western break from Canada. And this, I know that ever since Kinder Morgan pretty much shit the bed, there's more sentiment there now in order to, that a lot of people in Alberta and other Western provinces are now starting about a break from Canada. So this is good. It's going to be interesting. I mean, Quebec's always been the province that wanted to separate, but their separation was always based on language and culture, and because they want to be perceived as a nation inside a nation. I mean, I've always said that Quebec is a very self-centered place. Like, the people there are very self-centered in their culture and things like that, and how they want to be perceived by the rest of Canada. The one thing, though, about Quebec where I do give a little bit, where I do sort of stand in more solidarity with them, is I would say Quebec culture and language is the fastest disappearing in Canada due to things like immigration, because they take on a lot of immigrants too. And because of it, not many people are speaking French over there anymore. Like, you still have the areas where they do, but the French language is actually starting to disappear from Canada because of this, because we have a lot of immigrants, and some do learn the French language while they're there, but I would say majority end up learning English while they're here. If those are the people that actually pick up a new language. That's somewhere I stand in solidarity with Quebec. But aside from that, when they want to be perceived as a nation inside a nation or any of that shit, I just tune out and I say fuck off. I just have nothing else to say on the subject.
No, I was just sort of trying to visualize this concept of a French deep state, right? What would you like? What would the French deep state be like? Because would they just allow the normal state to walk like right through them, like the French allowed the Nazis to like walk through Paris? Would they allow that? I'm just visualizing the different scenarios of the French deep state.
On behalf of the province of Quebec, we surrender.
Oh God. Like there are see, economically speaking, right, like for example, we were talking about the India being interested in oil. I've now heard that India has completely stopped importing chickpeas and all lentils from Canada. They've just cancelled that deal. So which I'm not sure, but you'll know this better than me. Like, how has it hit the agricultural community in Canada?
The lack of imports or exports, you mean?
Yeah.
I'm not 100% actually, because I gotta say I'm not too well versed when it comes to the agricultural side of Canada. I think it's taken a hit for sure. But these days, the main thing that people have been focusing on has actually been the dairy industry, like dairy farmers and things like that. Just because when it has to do with when we're negotiating NAFTA right now, one of the main things is supply management, which is a quota on our dairy industry. So I can't actually speak too much for the whole agricultural area, but I think it's slowly been taking a hit over time in Canada. We're having less and less farmers. They're making less and less profits. So I think it is actually making a difference. And a certain amount of trades that we do have actually been hurting us. I know recently that within the last few months, South Korea said they were going to stop importing wheat from Canada. I think it was maybe had to do with some sort of pesticide that was used or something like that. But I do believe that the agricultural industry has taken a hit in Canada.
By the way, a throwback to the immigration problem. Even South Korea is now facing a problem with Yemeni refugees that they've taken into their country, who have now been put onto a place called Jeju Island. Jeju Island used to be their so-called honeymoon island, where people used to go for their honeymoons and all. It was a real romantic place. Now that place is full of Yemeni refugees.
Oh shit, eh?
So talk about a mood killer.
Yeah, well,
and their population is declining, and South Korea's population is declining because of the mood killer. Not a lot is happening in the honeymoon.
Well,
on the honeymoon, people are not.
It doesn't surprise me with everything that's going on in Yemen right now. I mean, with Saudi Arabia at war with them. And even that, it seems like it's... it kind of seems like there's... I mean, Canada isn't completely innocent in that, because even though we've gotten into a fight with Saudi Arabia over the last little bit, that we're still apparently sending them armored Humvees we're selling them off armored Humvees that we create here over to Saudi Arabia. And I don't like it simply because these Humvees are now being used in order to... are being used in the Yemeni war right now. I mean, as I've kind of looked into it, it seems like the reason the Saudi Arabians are inside of Yemen right now is because of there was an election that went down just before the invasion happened. A lot of people were saying that the previous government was a puppet for Saudi Arabia, and then he ended up getting he ended up getting like thrown out of office. So a lot of people seem to think that it has to do with Saudi Arabia trying to reinstall their own puppet government there so they can control it. I mean, it is right next to Saudi Arabia, so it wouldn't surprise me. And Saudi Arabia is just an awful, awful place.
See, Saudi Arabia was till recently trying to convince Israel, of all people, to attack Iran. They were trying to pay Israel. They were telling Israel, "We will give you tons and tons of money. Please attack Iran." Right? And which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Right? Considering their stated position, like they want to kill all Jews and all that sort of thing. It was ridiculous for me to read that Saudi Arabia was trying to pay Israel for people to attack Iran because they themselves don't have the capacity or the capability. Saudi Arabia, and I've said this I've said this hundreds of times, and I'll say it again. Saudi Arabia is the main problem in the Middle East, not Iran, right? Iran is mostly a case of low self-esteem, right? The Sunnis are saying that death to all Jews. We will also shout from the rooftops, death to all Jews. It's like that. It's reciprocal. It's not that Shias actually want to kill. Shias are more peaceful, not that they are actually peaceful, but they are more peaceful than the Sunnis because they have that cultural approach, whereas the Sunnis have the war approach that we will subjugate all mankind. And I would like to throw out this question to our audience, whoever is still watching. Apart from the Hezbollah and the Houthi rebels in Yemen, name one Shia terror organization. Use Google to as much as you want. You will not be able to find it. So puppet governments, like there was this problem. There was the problem in who was that Hezbollah-backed leader of? I think it was it the Albanian election or was the Lebanese election, where the one guy who was the son of a martyr sort of became the prime minister. Then he was deposed from government. Then he was trying to come out. I'm forgetting right now.
I'm not sure, to be honest. Between the two, I would guess Lebanon, but I'm not sure.
So, but basically, the fact of the matter is that right now, whatever is happening in the Middle East is basically a power struggle between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It is between the Sunnis, and amongst the Sunnis, the most hardcore, like the Wahhabis and the Salafis, versus the Shias. So, and these two are clashing and they are vying for supremacy in the Middle East. Not that it counts for much. It's like becoming the top dog of your neighborhood. It's not really a big deal. If your neighborhood is name a bad neighborhood in Canada, like one of those inner cities kind of things, right? Name a ghetto. You can't be. It's like fighting for supremacy for being the top dog in your ghetto. It's not going to happen, right? It doesn't mean much, but that is what is going on in the Middle East, and America, for whatever reason, seems to be supporting Saudi Arabia because of its long-standing policy of supporting Saudi Arabia. But in my opinion and opinion of Indian analysts, Saudi Arabia is not the best ally in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is funding Pakistan. Saudi Arabia is funding all the terror groups that America is fighting. Saudi Arabia funded Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda came out of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was funding ISIS. Saudi Arabia funded the Chechen rebels who were Salafi, the Salafis in that Chechnya conflict, right? Name it, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Sarajevo, all these places where the Christians were fighting the Muslims. Saudi Arabia was funding the Muslims. The Syrian crisis started because of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia wanted an oil and gas pipeline to run through Syria. The Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad was a minority leader. He was a Shia. He was an Alawite Shia, and he absolutely can't stand Saudis. So he said, no, there will be no oil and gas pipeline. So the Saudi started funding the rebels and the ISIS people in Syria, and it has become a shit show. So the root of all evil in the world, as far as terrorism is concerned, refugee crises are concerned, is Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. So Pakistan, because all the recruits are going from there. Saudi Arabia, because the money is coming from there. So Saudi Arabia is the worst possible ally to have, just because they have some. Because I'll tell you, recently, as a statement against all the human rights allegations that they are facing, the Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman, he crucified a murderer in town square. He put this guy from Myanmar who had been accused of murder, not even proven, accused of murder. He crucified him. He nailed him to a cross in the middle of the city and displayed it over there, saying that we don't care about your human rights concerns.
Holy shit.
This is your. None of this is happening in Iran, by the way. Yeah, the educated Saudis are becoming terrorists and driving planes into buildings. Educated Iranians are not doing that, right? The Persian community in the US, in Canada, do they behave in a secular manner, right? Now Saudis don't behave, even in Western countries, they don't behave in a secular manner. So the worst possible ally is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is your main enemy. And the Financial Action Task Force should put Saudi Arabia on that blacklist for terror financing. But unfortunately, Saudi Arabia is part of the Financial Action Task Force.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing too, is that despite this, everything you've just said, it seems to me that we're not, like, countries in the West aren't doing this. I mean, we have here in Canada, we're sending them armored vehicles in order for their military. And then, whatever it was, about almost a year and a half ago, Trump ended up sending them weapons, and it was the largest weapons deal in, I think, in like all of world history. I don't even think just the U.S. It was like $200 billion worth of weapons or things like that. I don't know why that they're doing this, but it's just, the more I watch it too, Saudi Arabia has been trying to warm up to Western countries, and maybe it has more to do with trying to get them to go to war with Iran or something like that, because they also recently announced an alliance with Israel, I'm pretty sure. There was something about that a while ago.
Yeah. See, I'll tell you about it. See, America has this one-track mind, right? Nuclear weapons. They should not have nuclear weapons. Right? There are n number of ways you can curtail the nuclear weapons program in Iran. N number of ways. Just because they were proliferators at one point of time. Not that I'm an advocate for Iran, right? I'm not an advocate for Iran. I'm just saying, thinking of scenarios, how you can curtail a nuclear weapons program and deal with an actual menace in the Middle East, which is Saudi Arabia. Right? Concerning Pakistan, there's this one guy called Bruce Ryder. Bruce Ryder was a top policy guy who decided America's security policy for the Southeast Asian region. Right? The security relationship with India, security relationship with, at one point he was, security relationship with Pakistan and all. He at one point of time had said, we don't know what to do with Pakistan. For the top policy guy of your country to say we don't know what to do with Pakistan